Glad to see y'all. My name is Ian. For those of you who don't know, I am the family life pastor here at Epicenter Church. Pastor Mark is out of town this morning, and that means that I get the honor and the privilege of diving into God's Word with each of you today. You know, and it's always an honor to have this opportunity, but more than honored today, I'm excited to jump into what I believe God has for us this morning. So let's just get started right out the gate here with the book of John, chapter 5. There it is. Come on. Y'all get me hype, man. I ain't even started yet. Beginning in verse 1, and it says in the New Living Translation, it says this: Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city near the sheep gate was the pool of Bethesda with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, and paralyzed, lay on porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. Some translations say that this man had been in sickness or had been an invalid. And we don't know exactly what his diagnosis was, but we know that he had some kind of illness that had rendered him disabled, and he had been dealing with that for 38 years. Less than 2 weeks longer, but longer. Still, I'm gonna own that. Longer, right? It's a long time. And for 38 years, this dude has been showing up at this pool, hanging out with all kinds of other people in similar situations. He's been watching other people get healed, which we'll talk more about in a minute. For 38 years, he's been hoping that today might be his lucky day, but for 38 years, nothing changed. He stayed sick. He stayed disabled. His situation and circumstances were not changing. He was stuck. And as you can see from the picture on a giant screen behind me, that's what I want to talk to y'all about today, is this idea of being stuck. How many of y'all ever felt stuck? Right? I don't mean like got your head stuck in a stair rail like my son did one time, stuck. I mean like stuck. Like the dictionary defines being stuck as being unable to move from a particular position or place, or unable to change a situation. Right? Most of us have been there. It can leave us feeling helpless or hopeless. It leaves us feeling like being stuck is this feeling that we just don't have any control over what comes next. You know, and when I think about this idea of being stuck, I've been stuck plenty of different times in plenty of different ways throughout my life. But the prominent idea, if you will, that comes to my mind when I think about the idea of being stuck is vehicles stuck in ditches. And I forgot y'all were standing. You can have a seat. Sorry. Thank you, Sam. All right, and so any of the students who've ever gone with me on a long-distance road trip are going to be shocked to hear this, but I actually used to be a much worse driver than I am. Pretty good now, actually, by comparison at least. You know, and so in the first 5 or 6 years of my life, I actually spent a decent amount of time stuck in ditches with my vehicles. But the one that really jumps to mind this morning is this very specific instance. You know, I grew up in Michigan, spent the first 23 years of my life there. And so I had just gotten a brand new job as a temp worker at General Motors, best paying job I ever had. So one of the first things I did, I went out and bought me a new truck. New to me, of course, because I was a temp worker. But it was like 8 years old, but it was a Chevy Silverado, man. It was gold. It was a truck I had wanted since I had started driving. I was ready to go with that thing, man. And I loved it. I drove it everywhere. And one day, in I think February, there was a snowstorm, as is often the case in February in Michigan. And I had to go see this girl. And my dad said, "Son, I don't think that's a good idea." I said, "Dad, I gotta go see this girl." He said, "All right, now it's your truck. Go ahead." And so I was driving, you know, and I made about 60% of the way there. And I was like, "Man, this is cool. Dad, see, I got this, Dad." That was stupid. Anyways, I'm driving along. I'm going below the speed limit, but probably a little faster than I should. And I hit some black ice. And some of y'all Southern folk don't know about no black ice. Because, yeah, see, it's ice. You don't see it coming because it's the same color as the road. And so you're just driving along, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, here we go. And so that's what happened. I'm driving my truck, and you're supposed to turn into the skid. So I start, it's like I'm on a roller coaster, man. We going on the road now about 45 miles an hour. We're going woo, woo, woo. And I feel like I'm starting to get control of it. Like I'm turning into the skid. Like it's kind of, the swerve isn't quite as drastic. And then off in the distance, though, I see headlights. I'm like, oh, gosh, I can either smoke this dude head on or I can take this ditch because about 30 yards later, there's no ditch left. It's just woods. And I'd rather hit a ditch than some woods. And so we go, woo, boom, and I rolled that thing, man. I didn't roll it 90 degrees. I didn't roll it 180 degrees. I didn't even roll that sucker 360 degrees. I did a 450-degree roll in my truck. And I'm sitting there. It happened so fast. I thought I only did 90, but it just went, woo. I'm sitting there like this. Well, I guess my dad was right. Again. Stuck in that ditch, y'all. I had to sit there and I had to wait for the police to come to write the report. I had no control over how long it was going to take them to get there. I had to sit and wait for the tow truck to come and put my truck on a flatbed. I had no control over how long it was going to take them to get there. It's a snowstorm. They all got a little bit more sense. They're not out in it driving around. I had to wait for my dad to come pick me up. I have no control over how long it was going to take him to get there or how many times he was going to say, I told you so. And in all of my 21-year-old wisdom, not even 21 quite yet, I had chosen not to get comprehensive insurance on my beautiful gold truck. So in Michigan, all they give you is a $500 check and say, good luck. So I was stuck driving the only vehicle I could afford for $500, which at that time was a 1990-something Suburban with 300,000 plus miles on it that was so busted looking that I once got pulled over just for driving it because the police said, anybody driving this thing is up to something. So I was stuck for 2 years, stuck driving horrible vehicles, right? But obviously, the kind of stuck I want to talk to you about tonight is a lot more than just having your vehicle trapped in a ditch. It's that feeling of being unable to move forward, being trapped or held hostage, whether as a direct result of our choices or as a result of circumstances that we had nothing to do with. We can feel stuck in our jobs. We can feel stuck in our marriages. We can feel stuck in our relationships or our families or our finances or our classes at school or our health or just our lives in general. Feeling stuck is frustrating, infuriating, and sometimes it's debilitating because it can make us question whether we should even keep going or whether we'll ever be able to make forward progress again. The biggest source of feeling stuck is knowing that we don't have control over what happens next. Maybe we know that we're due a promotion and we've earned it because we've been there for 15 years, but we don't have any control over whether the boss will make the right decision. You know, maybe we're sitting in a doctor's office hearing news we never expected to hear, and we're scared and we feel stuck because we don't have any control over what's going to happen next. And so when we feel out of control, we don't have any idea what's going to happen, we feel stuck, like we can't move. Remember that definition, unable to change a situation or move out of a position. We feel stuck. And I think that's where the man finds himself in verse 5. If you look, your Bible probably does not have a verse 4, especially if you got one of them digital Bibles like I got. It's not there. It took me like the sixth time of reading this passage before I realized there's no verse 4. The reason it's not there is because none of the early manuscripts had verse 4. It was added later. They believe it was added later. After John did not write verse 4. But it was added later for some context of what's going on here. And so basically what verse 4 communicates is that there was this belief that an angel of the Lord would come and stir the waters of the pool of Bethesda. And then when the waters would bubble up, the first person to get into the pool would be cured. And so that's why this man has been showing up at this pool for 38 years, hoping that today's going to be the day that he gets in the pool first. But the thing is, he has no control. He doesn't have any control over when the waters are going to bubble up. He doesn't have any control over who else is going to show up at the pool that day. He doesn't have any control over how fast they're able to get there versus how fast he's able to get there. So he's stuck, and he's been sitting there for 38 years wishing, hoping, dreaming that today's going to be the day I get in the water. And then Jesus shows up in verse 6. It says in verse 6, when Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, would you like to get well? I can't, sir, the sick man said, for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me. So Jesus, he sees this man out of an entire crowd of people, and he walks up to him. He says, would you like to get well? And to us, that seems like a pretty obvious question, right? Like, duh. I'm at the pool of Bethesda, Jesus, with the bubbly water and all the sick folk. Of course I want to get well. But Jesus asked the question anyways, and you're going to see why. So he says, do you want to get well? Do you want to become unstuck? And the man doesn't even answer the question. He just begins to explain all the reasons why he simply cannot and will not be made well. I can't because I have no one to help me. I can't because someone else always gets there first. He's essentially saying that it don't matter whether I want to get well or not because I'm stuck here either way. The thing is that the giver of life, the co-creator of the universe, the great physician is standing in front of him asking if he wants to be well, and he lists all the reasons why that simply can't happen when all he had to do was just say yes. You know, it's easy for us to sit here and be, well, this guy's a dummy. Got Jesus right in front of him asking if he wants to be well. He said, well, I can't. But we don't. This man is living this story. He doesn't have the benefit of understanding what's going to happen a few verses later, or what's going to happen at the end of the book of John, or what's going to happen, throughout the rest of Scripture. He doesn't have the benefit of hindsight that we have, and so we kind of judge these characters in the biblical narratives. We can say he's crazy. But the question is, how many of us would have the same kind of response if Jesus showed up and asked us a similar question this morning, right? How many of us, if Jesus said, hey, do you want to get unstuck from that situation that you're in? How many of us would our instinct be to say something like, well, I can't because I have no spouse who wants to put in the work to make things better? I can't because I have no opportunity for promotion at work. I can't because I have no financial security to allow me to risk chasing my dreams. I can't because I have no child that's willing to obey. I can't because I have nobody in my corner to support me. I can't because I have an addiction that I can't overcome. I can't because I have pain from my past that I can't escape. I can't because I have a diagnosis that has stopped me in my tracks. I can't because the way forward is too difficult. I can't because I done tried it a whole bunch of times before on my own and it never worked out. So I can't get well. We're sitting here right now today in the presence of the co-creator of the universe, and for many of us, if you were asked the question, do you want to get well, our instinct would be to dwell on all the reasons why we can't get unstuck when all we have to do is say yes to Jesus. Man, just like the sick man at the pool of Bethesda, some of us have allowed our circumstances to dictate our outlook, which has led to us getting even more stuck than we already were. By focusing on the reasons why we have stayed stuck, we're saying, whether we realize it or not, that our problems are too big for God. We are too stuck for him to pull us out. It's as if we're saying, God, how could I possibly become unstuck when I'm dealing with all of this horrible mess? I don't think you really understand what I'm going through here. I don't think you understand the magnitude of my situation. Of course I want to get unstuck, but I don't see how that matters very much when I'm much more stuck than anyone who has ever been stuck before. So how could I ever get unstuck from the stickiness that I'm stuck in? Man, Pastor Mark says this all the time. Faith requires a shift in perspective. But too often, because we are stuck, we tend to focus on what got us stuck, which makes us unable to see a way out of the stuckness. So we start to believe that we'll always be stuck, which makes our current stickiness even stickier than it was before. It's like spinning the tires in the mud, digging ourselves in deeper and deeper while making a bigger and bigger mess, all the while convincing ourselves that we have what it takes to make it out on our own. We have to be willing to change what we're focused on in order to see change in our situation. In verse 7, Jesus identifies the man at the pool talking to Jesus as the sick man, or your translation might say the invalid. I know that John is doing this out of a grammatical necessity because he doesn't know the man's name and he needs to differentiate between the man and Jesus. So I'm not trying to read anything into Scripture that isn't there, but I also think that it's a picture of how we often tend to look at ourselves when we feel stuck. We identify ourselves as the situation that we're stuck in. So when we look in the mirror, we see the overworked, underpaid, and unappreciated employee. We see the failed parent. We see the divorcee. We see the bankrupt business owner. We see the person with a harrowing medical diagnosis. We see the person struggling to pay their bills. We see the addict. We see the person with the painful past. We see the struggling student who just can't pass the class. We see the one who can never seem to get anything right. The things that keep us feeling most stuck become the things that feel most true about ourselves. And then that seeming truth perpetuates the cycle of stuckness, causing us to buy into the lie that this is not only a situation or circumstance that we're dealing with, but that this is who we are. And I think that's where the man at the pool is when Jesus walks up and says, "Do you want to get well?" I think his thought process is something like, of course I want to get well, but how can I? I'm the sick man. I'm the invalid. I have nobody, and someone else always gets there first. This is who I am. This is who I've been for 38 years, and it sure feels like it's who I'm going to be for the next 38. But verse 8 shows us Jesus' response to this man's list of impossibilities. It says, Jesus told him, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." Instantly, he was healed. Instantly, he was healed. In many instances throughout Scripture, when Jesus miraculously cures someone, it happens after they have expressed faith that they can, in fact, be cured, or even after they have requested the cure. But in this instance, there's no faith evident in the man at all. The man is saying, not only does he not exhibit faith, he actually expresses that there is no possible way for him to be made well. And yet, and still, in the face of 38 years of frustration, sickness, waiting, and doubt, Jesus looks at the man and says, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." So John writes that the man instantly became well after Jesus spoke over him. But he doesn't indicate that there was any physical evidence of his cure as there were in so many of Jesus' other miracles. When he heals a blind man, there's a physical evidence. Oh, I can see now. When he heals a man with leprosy, there's physical evidence. It's because the leprosy disappears. When he heals a dead man, I think you can kind of tell that he's not dead anymore. But in this specific instance, there's no outward physical evidence that the miracle has happened. And that is what I believe makes the first sentence in verse 9 so significant. It says that the man rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. See, this man had for 38 years been lying on a mat, unable to walk. For 38 years, he's been stuck in the same situation. For 38 years, he's been dealing with the same problem. And now along comes Jesus, who says, "Get up." But as far as the man can tell, nothing has changed. Everything in his life is exactly the same as it was just moments before when he gave Jesus the whole list of reasons why he could not be made well. He still has no one to carry him to the pool. He still has no chance of being the first one in the waters. He's still lying on the same mat in the same place that he's been for 38 years. The only difference is that Jesus told him to get up. And now he has to choose whether he's going to believe that he can. And so while the miraculous cure didn't necessarily require any faith on his part, walking in that cure absolutely will. If he goes to stand up and stumbles the way he always has, he's going to feel more hopeless than he ever did. If he trusted Jesus and still didn't have the strength to lift his own mat, he's going to feel more stuck than he ever has been. So he has to choose between staying stuck in a familiar circumstance or acting in faithful obedience and walking into the new thing that God has for him. He could have kept sitting on that mat and looked at Jesus like, "What in the world are you talking about? Get up and walk. I done told you I can't." He could have been perfectly cured but continued to live sick because he refused to believe that a cure was possible. He could have lived out the rest of his days stuck in the same spot because he was unwilling to put his trust in Jesus. But he didn't. He had faith that Jesus would give him the strength to obey the command he had given. So he stood up, he rolled up the mat that had been the source of his identity for 38 years, and he walked forward into a new reality. This is going to be tough, but I cannot stress this enough, that there are some people in this room, some of us in this room, who are stuck, not because God hasn't answered our prayers or given us a way out or shown us a path forward, but because we're unwilling to put our trust in Him and walk in the freedom that He's promised. We're unwilling to act in faithful obedience and believe that we can get unstuck in ways that we never could on our own. It may not look like the path we were expecting or feel like the way out we had hoped for, but this man spent 38 years hoping and dreaming to be dropped in the waters of the pool of Bethesda, but he found his cure in a few simple words from the mouth of Jesus. Some of us showed up this morning feeling stuck in a situation that God has already set us free from because we're unwilling to get up and walk. I got a 3-year-old son. One of his favorite shows is Paw Patrol. For any of you privileged enough to not know what Paw Patrol is, it's one of those shows that exists solely so that they can sell toys. Matter of fact, it's produced by a toy company. And it's a show about these pups that all fill like different community helper roles. There's a police pup, a fire pup, a construction pup, a recycling pup, a water pup, and a pilot pup, I guess. Yeah, like, he knows. Sky. Yeah, she's there. I don't know what Zuma does, man. He's the water pup. He's just like chilling. Right? But because it's a kid's show, there's only so many dangerous situations that these heroes can rescue anyone from. And so there's a lot of characters stuck in trees in Paw Patrol. There's cats and dogs and chickens and farmers, and they're all stuck in trees. And so my son, Lincoln, for a couple weeks at least, one of his favorite games to play was I'm stuck in a tree. And so this is how it would go. We got this, is it called a ledge? Okay, we got a ledge in our house. It's like 2 feet off the ground, right? And this kid's like 3.5 feet tall already. He's huge. But what he'll do is he'll climb up onto this ledge like this. He goes, "Help! I'm stuck in a tree!" Man, the first time that happened, we looked at him like, what are you talking about? He's like, "Help! I'm stuck in a tree! You're Marshall. You need to save me." Marshall's the fire pup. And so, man, you go over there, you pick him up, you're like, "All right, come on, I'm Marshall. Come on, let's go. Paw Patrol, to the rescue, whatever." Put him down. 45 seconds later, "Help! I'm stuck in a tree!" Come on, dude. But this is the thing that really gets me, right? There's this one time, Tiana was cooking dinner, my wife, and she couldn't help him, or maybe she was on the phone. I was, I believe, helping Liam, our oldest son, with his homework. So we were both unavailable to play Paw Patrol at that time. And he don't come and say, "Hey, do you want to play Paw Patrol?" Right? He just goes sit on a ledge. How about, "Help, I'm stuck in a tree." So he did that. We like, "Linky, we can't play right now, man. Just get down." "No, I need you." "All right, well, if you need me, come here. Just get down and walk to me." "But I'm stuck in a tree." It's like, bro, that's not a tree. That's a ledge. You climbed up there. Just get down. Just seriously, man, just take 1 foot, step down, and walk over to me. I'm right here. "Help, I'm stuck in a tree." That dude said, "I ain't getting saved unless I get saved the way I want to be saved. I ain't getting unstuck unless you unstick me the way I asked you to unstick me." How often do we have a way out, but we're unwilling to take it because it's not happening the way we wanted or expected? Man, sometimes we desire control so much, we want to even control the way we get unstuck. And some of us are in this place hollering, "Help, I'm stuck." And Jesus is saying, "Bro, I gave you 3 ways out already." "Yeah, but that's not the one I asked for." The man could have said, "Yeah, I want to get well. Put me in the pool. That's the only way for me to be healed. Help me out, Jesus, put me in the pool." But Jesus said, "Nah, bro, get up and walk." Jesus was the solution to his problem, but in order to benefit from his newfound freedom, he had to get up, pick up his mat, and walk. He had to do something he was uncomfortable with. He had to put his faith and trust in Jesus. So he rolled up his mat because he no longer had any use for it. And in the same way, we have to be willing to believe that we can, through God's strength, rise above whatever is holding us down and put away things that we used to let define us and walk into faithful obedience towards the new life we have been called to. Look, I want to acknowledge that sometimes that faithful obedience is a mindset more than it is an action, because there's some things we can't simply just walk away from. You can't just walk away from a medical diagnosis or a financial crisis or a broken marriage that needs the pieces picking up or any number of other things that require time and attention and healing and repair. I understand that change is almost always a process, but what we can do is walk away from the mindset of finding our identity in those things, from allowing those things to impede our forward motion in other areas of our lives, or from weighing us down and making us feel so stuck that we are unable to celebrate all the small victories and tiny miracles that we will encounter as we walk the path of faithful obedience towards the destination of transformation. To pick up your mat and walk means to simply keep moving forward, to keep reminding ourselves of the freedom that has already been declared over our situation, and to keep striving to become more in tune with Jesus every single day. What that looks like for each of us is going to depend on what your specific situation and circumstances are, but it will never, ever look like being stuck in the same old spot, finding your worth and identity in the same old things. And it's really tempting to stop this message right here, because that's some good stuff, man. It ain't mine. It's straight from God. But look, it's more in here. And this stuff ain't as fun. Just be straight with you. Because we continue to read in the second half of verse 9, it says, "But this miracle happened on the Sabbath." So the Jewish leaders objected. They said to the man who was cured, "You can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry your sleeping mat." But he replied, "The man who healed me told me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" "Who said such a thing as that?" they demanded. The man didn't know, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. So the Jewish leaders that John is writing about here is the religious leaders of that time, the Sanhedrin. And they were like the keepers of the law. But they didn't just take God's law, they interpreted God's law the way that they felt it should be interpreted, which always meant to add hundreds of more conditions and rules and stipulations on how you could follow God's law. And so what they were doing here is they're talking about the law of the Sabbath. But their interpretation of the law of the Sabbath, their interpretation had caused them to miss the intent of the gift of the Sabbath. Because when God gave us the Sabbath, it was meant as a day of rest. It was meant as a reminder to sit and be, not to just do all the time, but to be, to dwell in the presence of God, to remember that He is our provider, He is our creator, to remember that we were created to be in relationship with Him. And so Sabbath is about slowing down and remembering who God is and who He is to us. It's something that we get to do. God put it into the Mosaic Law to make sure that everyone took advantage of the opportunity to just sit in His presence and remember who He was. It was an opportunity that they had to draw closer to God. But these religious leaders had taken something that we get to do and turned it into something that we have to do. Instead of presenting it as an opportunity to grow closer to God, they presented it as a list of rules and regulations and conditions that had to be met in order to even continue to live, because there were some instances in which you could be put to death for violating the Sabbath. And so they see this man, like, no, you can't work on the Sabbath. You're breaking the rules. This is a man who's just been restored by Jesus. What greater example is there of relationship with the Creator than being the living, breathing, mat-carrying embodiment of God's love and God's power? But instead, they're more focused on the rules. We get to be in relationship with Jesus. we get to worship him every Sunday in community together and every day at our homes as part of our everyday lives. We get to be with God, and yet some of us, it feels less like an opportunity and more like an obligation. And when we go to church and when we follow Jesus, not because we get to, but because we feel like we have to, we will always be teetering on the edge of getting stuck in self-righteous ritualism. If all we're ever doing is going through the motions and checking off the boxes, we're going to become bitter, we're going to become judgmental, we're going to become the opposite of the kind of people that we were created to be. See, the man was walking in faithful obedience, but the religious leaders were operating in faithless obsession over obedience. You can obey all you want, but if that obedience isn't accompanied by faith, you're not doing anybody any favors. And in reality, what was happening is that these religious leaders were trying to take back control. They were trying to say, oh, look, we can be perfect. We can follow every single rule. But they would take these rules and lay them over everybody else's life, but never bother to apply them to their own lives. Man, if all we're doing is going through the motions, if we're obeying without the faith, or if we've got faith without obedience, we need a heart check. And we're in danger of getting stuck in self-righteousness. Verse 13 said that the man didn't know who healed him because Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. But verse 14 says that afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and told him, now you are well, so stop sinning or something even worse may happen to you. Man, for me, when I read this the first couple of times, it's really tempting to read this in like this ominous tone, right? Like, hey, stop sinning or else. Dun, 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 dun. But that's not how I think that Jesus meant it. Right? Now, the statement does seem to indicate that the man's sickness had been a direct result of some sin in his life. Before we go any further, Jesus is clear in John chapter 9 that sickness and or disability is not a punishment for sin, but it can be a consequence of it. And so it seems as though the man had done something sinful years ago, and the sickness was a consequence of that action. But when Jesus tells him, it's not this vengeful threat, it's not this ominous dun 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 kind of thing, but it's rather a compassionate warning. Right? The same way, if you saw your kid running into traffic in a car coming, you'd say, hey, look out! That's what Jesus is doing here. He's saying, hey, man, be careful. Don't go back to acting like you're in control. Don't go back to telling yourself you can figure it all out on your own. Stop sinning. Don't go back to who you used to be. Jesus is modeling so beautifully how each of us should strive to live, right? Instead of offering conviction and judgment, tell him, look what you've done wrong, he instead offers mercy and compassion. He heals the man of his sickness after 38 years, and then he brings a call to repentance. Jesus shows the man that he matters before offering him a better way to live. And that's why I don't think that this conversation in the temple, when Jesus says stop sinning, I don't think it's a commandment as much as it is an invitation. Is Jesus saying, hey, don't get stuck in the same sinful patterns that led you to where you were, but continue to walk in the faithful obedience of submission to my ways, and you'll never have to be stuck again. In her book, My Body Is Not a Prayer Request, an author named Amy Kenny makes a pretty clear distinction between being cured and being healed. And I think that's what Jesus is getting at here. And I'm paraphrasing because she wrote like a whole book, and I don't want to read the whole thing to you because it took me like 6 weeks. Anyways. To be cured, she says, is to have symptoms erased from our bodies. Like when the sick man was miraculously able to walk again, or when the tumors were removed from the brain of this young man I knew growing up. They were removed by skilled surgeons, and he was declared cancer-free. Those are both cures, and they're both amazing, and they're both worth celebrating. But a cure is not promised to each of us. Healing is. The kind of healing that I'm talking about is to be restored into right relationship with God, to be set free from the hold that sin has on us, and to leave behind the pain and trauma of our past, and to walk in the freedom that is only found in submission to God's will. This kind of healing happens in our bodies, yes, but it also happens in our minds and our spirits and in our souls. And it's not a one-time occurrence, but a daily decision to walk in the healing, life-saving grace that Jesus offers. So I think when Jesus talks to the man in the temple, what he's really saying is, hey, look, you've been cured. Now walk in my healing. You've been freed from sickness. Now choose freedom from sin and its consequences. Make it your mission to spend the rest of your days stuck in the center of God's will, because there is a better way than the one that got you to where you were stuck in the first place. You know, this whole message, we've been talking about this idea of how being stuck is most obvious when we feel like we don't have any control over what comes next, when we don't have any control over the outcome. Pastor Johnny's been trying to tell this to me for months now. But I'm going to break some news to y'all. Whether you feel stuck or completely free, whether you're living in the best or the worst days of your life, whether everything is amazing or your life is falling apart, no matter what your circumstances are in this moment, you're not in control. Sometimes it feels like we are, because we're making all these decisions, we're making moves, and we're like, oh yeah, I feel like a boss, man. I did all the right stuff, I made all the right moves, I made all the right decisions. Where'd that wisdom come from? Other times it feels like we know it's very obvious we're not in control, because I would have never chosen this. This is not the life I planned for. This is not the life I dreamed of. This is not the life I wanted. And I really want to get out of here, but I don't have any control over what comes next. Whether you're on the highest mountain or the lowest valley, you don't have control. Which is why it's so important for each of us to walk in God's gift of healing grace, to walk in His gift of compassionate mercy, to walk in His gift of life-saving love and forgiveness, and to say, God, since I know I don't have control, to surrender, because I never had it in the first place, can't give up something I don't have. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give up my illusion of control, and I'm going to ask you to help me stay stuck in the center of your will. If I got to be stuck somewhere, I can't think of a better place to be than stuck in the middle of the life that God had created for me. There's going to be times where it looks real tempting to wander over to the right or over to the left and say, God, actually, I think I got a better idea. Let me go over here. But just like driving in the snow to see a girl in the middle of February in Michigan, eventually you're going to be like, hey, Dad, I was wrong again. Can you come get me unstuck? Stand to your feet if you would. Man, to be cured is a beautiful thing. And I believe that God still cures people today. I believe it with all my heart. I just heard a story, a testimony. It's not mine to share, but I heard a testimony this week of somebody here in our church who was miraculously cured just a couple weeks ago. It's awesome. We can't bank on a cure. Because even if we get it, if our heart's still broken, if our priorities are still jacked up, if our soul is still tarnished, even if we get that physical cure, it's not going to change much. But what we can pursue is healing. We can chase after wholeness. We can chase after understanding that God has a plan and a purpose for our lives, and if we're willing to submit and surrender to Him and walk in faithful obedience, then we will live in His healing and stay stuck in the middle of His will.